Welcome to the next in our series of webinars on the 12 global performance targets for road safety. These are the voluntary targets. The targets provide a framework for governments to work towards reducing road deaths and are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Alliance member NGOs have an important role to play in supporting their governments through advocacy, behavior change and education, monitoring and implementation. In this webinar, we look at the second part of Target 8. By 2030, increase the proportion of motor vehicle occupants using safety belts or standard child restraint systems to close to 100%. We have invited Lorrie Walker of Safe Kids to take us through the rationale for well-fitted child restraints and how NGOs can help to increase the proportion of children traveling safely in appropriate restraints. Welcome, Lorrie.
Hello, and thanks for being with me today to talk about child passenger safety around the world. We really are one world. We really do share common problems, and many of them begin on our way to and from activities. So we're using roads as pedestrians, as bicyclists, as passengers, and as drivers in vehicles. And this is designed today to illuminate the picture of children in and around vehicles. So I am your presenter. I'm Lorrie Walker. I'm with Safe Kids Worldwide, and I've been working in the field of child passenger safety for actually more than 30 years. So I bring to you experience from the field. I bring to you experience from the opportunity to draft education pieces, and also from the training perspective. So thank you for being with me today. And if you have further questions for me, please feel free to send me an email. My address is at the end of this presentation. So today we're going to look at some of the key elements to keeping children safe in cars. And one of the first things that we have to do, and you will have to do, is define who a child is in your community or your country. In some places, it's only children defined as those who need car seats. In other countries and in other communities, it's children defined all the way up to the time that they leave their parents' home and go off to college or get married. And for us at Safe Kids, we look at children up to the age of 19. So we go through the teen years. We're going to talk about why data is valuable and important from the very beginning to start keeping records about what you see, what you hear, and who you're working with. We're going to look at how diverse partners can make your program very strong, that you cannot do this alone, that a partnership is essential to build a good, strong child passenger safety program. Why a clear strategy and a plan is needed before you begin work. And we look at all the laws that are in a country or a state, the regulations. How's the enforcement? If you have a law, is anyone enforcing the law? How are people educated about the law? Where's the data coming from? And how do we use the best communication tools to reach our audience? We're also going to look at how a good, better, best philosophy helps you get started. You don't have to reach for perfection from the very first day. You just have to get started and build from that. And then finally, why kids need adults to be safe. I think we all pretty much recognize that, but there's real data to support that. So in 2018, the Global Status Report was released by the World Health Organization, and it tells us that we have a huge global problem. Over 1.25 million people are killed on roadways every year. It's now the leading killer of people at the prime of their lives from the ages of 5 to 29. The burden of this is borne mostly by pedestrians and bicyclists and motorcyclists, and now beginning in some countries in cars, particularly those in developing countries. And I guess the big takeaway from this is that's just too high a price to pay for mobility. We need to do a better job of preventing these fatalities and making roadways safer through prevention, but also through engineering and education and enforcement there are other things we can do to keep people safe on roadways. And we have to take drastic action, because one of those 1.25 million people could be someone you love, or it could even be you. So Target 8, which is one of the performance targets, gives us 10 years to increase the proportion of motor vehicle occupants who are using safety belts or child restraint systems to get us close to 100%. That's a really high benchmark, but it's a goal that we all should be working towards. Every person, every vehicle, every road user preventing through restraint the use of a tool to make themselves safer. So when we talk about safety, we have to understand it's not always about money. And what happens in some countries, even very wealthy countries, if there's no culture of safety, where we begin from the very beginning to put medication away so a toddler who's crawling can't pick up a pill that's fallen onto the floor, or that a swimming pool would have a fence around it so a toddler can't get out a back door or a front door and fall into a swimming pool or a ditch that has water. In a car, that we have some type of a restraint and it's used. It's not just there, but it's used. And making that part of our everyday thinking is the real challenge of what we're talking about today. Making this safety culture in the back of everyone's mind as they're taking care of children, and also preserving their own lives so that they can be good caregivers to their children. So even in those wealthy countries, there can be problems if the government doesn't address it, if the religion doesn't address it, and if the culture doesn't address it. Those are the places that we have to start to plant the seed if it's not there. And we need to do it, as I said, for both children and adults. There are recognized barriers to creating this safety culture. And sometimes it starts with that belief that death on a highway is just natural. It's normal. This is the way it's always been. We have to change that. And you and I both know behavior change is difficult. And sometimes we live in cultures where families are large, or people may share cars among multiple families and carry many more than the seats that are in the car designed to carry just 5 occupants or 6 occupants. We may find 8 or 10 or 12 people who are sitting in a car, none of them restrained. And then some of the other barriers could be a limited access to those safety products. So in cars, we have parts of the world where they're still selling cars that have no seat belts. Most countries do require that imported cars or cars made in country have seat belts, but not everyone does. And so we want to look for and promote the use of the equipment that's in the car that's designed for safety so people get the full benefit. And it could be airbags, it could be side impact protection, it could be seat belts, and it could be child restraints. For bicyclists, we want them using helmets and reflectors on their bikes and clothing that's bright enough and flashing in the nighttime so that you can see people who are riding on bicycles. And pedestrians having reflectors on their clothing and using sidewalks when possible. So when we define child, we can look at kids all the way up to age 19 or 14 or 13, whatever age you determine, and recognize that babies, the child who's on the far left of this screen, will require something very different than an 8 or a 9-year-old who might be this third child, or a 13-year-old. So we have to define what child means in our culture and then design around that. I would recommend, and from my years of experience, that we look at the issue from the eyes of all the children who need some kind of a modifier, some kind of a restraint that has to work in the car before the use of a seatbelt alone will provide the best protection for the child. So car seats will be an essential for at least the first 3 children that you see from the far left to the center 2 positions. But the third child may do extremely well just using a seatbelt. And we have to help people understand what each child needs. So restraints are a proven remedy. We know that correctly used, child restraints can reduce that risk of injury and death by 71%. They're very safe. And if a car turns over and a child is sitting in one of these restraints with a harness, they're likely to stay in that restraint until help arrives. Otherwise, if a child is unrestrained, they may be thrown from a vehicle, they may be thrown around a vehicle. And what's nice about restraints is that they are, in at least many countries, regulated by weight of the child, the height of the child, the age of the child, and the child's developmental need. We would not want to put a toddler in a seatbelt alone if we didn't have to. But it's better than nothing. It would certainly be far better to have that child in a car seat. And not only are we looking at restraints that are in the car, we want them correctly used, so every occupant gets the full benefit of the restraint. Our daily mission should be to increase child restraint use in our countries. And you'll notice in this picture, this is a picture taken by a police officer on a roadside stop where gasoline in a can was restrained in the child's safety seat, in the restraint, and the child was taken out of the car seat and sitting next to the precious gas that's in the can. This is very dangerous, number one, carrying gasoline like this in a vehicle, but also removing the child from the restraint and protecting the gasoline makes no sense. So 37% of the children who died in the United States in 2017 were completely unrestrained in crashes. And that is unacceptable when you have features like a car seat right here, a seat belt right here, and they're not used because the parent has chosen or the caregiver has chosen not to do that. Still a problem in the United States. So how do we go about increasing restraint use? We look at it from a scientific and also a sociological perspective. We want to be sure that we study our roadways, our vehicles, our driver training pre-crash. We call that the Haddon matrix because we're looking before a crash, during a crash, and after a crash. What are the factors that lead to survivability? If I have a car that has good tires, good brakes, it's riding on a road that doesn't have a lot of potholes or other dangers, that's a good thing. During the crash, are all the occupants in the vehicle restrained and in position so that they get the full benefit of the restraint? And it could be the benefit of an airbag. And post-crash, how long does it take an ambulance to arrive on the scene? Who are the people that are driving the ambulance? Are they trained to deliver first responder care, or are they just transporters? And all of those factors contribute to how well a person does in a crash. When we're designing all of these factors, we want to collaborate with the stakeholders, all the people who have an interest in protecting children and families on the roadways. So it's very important that you try not to do any of this all by yourself. It's dangerous. It's really not very fulfilling because you will miss things that are critical that other people, it's second nature to them to know what to do. So your government should be involved, and that could be your Ministry of Transport, NGOs, and that's education communities, just like Safe Kids or the Alliance, public and private sector, hospitals, child care centers, all those folks have a stake and are willing participants often. You also want to make sure that you use people who may have already been in crashes, who can speak to the experience and share with others who may not believe how really devastating it can be to be in a crash, to suffer an injury, to suffer a death, and then try to put their lives back together again. And so this little program today will help us look at that big picture. So how do car seats work? And I want you to pay special attention to these four pieces. Car seats keep children in the car. So that's where they're safest. If you're ejected from the car, you're 5 times more likely to die because you'll be hit by another vehicle or you're hitting the concrete at a high speed. So car seats keep you in the car. They protect the head, spine, and neck of the child. They spread the crash forces over the large part of the baby's body or the child's body, which is the torso. And then they hold the child at the shoulders and hips, the strongest parts of the child's body, Children are weak, especially in the very beginning, and the strongest bones they have are the shoulders and the hips. And now I want to show you why seatbelts work. Seatbelts work in exactly the same way that the car seat works, but these are designed for bigger people. And it's just as if you had a large overcoat that would fit an adult. Of course, you could put the child and wrap him in the overcoat, but it wouldn't fit the child. And that's what the child restraint does. It helps the child work with the safety equipment that's already in the vehicle. So seatbelts work in exactly the same way. They keep the person in the car. They protect the head, spine, and neck because they're seated in the vehicle seating position, typically that has a head restraint behind it. It spreads the crash forces over a large part of the body, which is the torso, just like the child. And it holds that person at the shoulders and hips. Again, the two strongest areas of the person are the bony hips and shoulders. So you can see they work exactly the same way, but the car seat is designed for the smaller occupant that can't get the full benefit of the adult-sized seatbelt. So there are 4 types of restraints for kids. And much like it's going to take us 10 years to increase the number of people using restraints, it's going to take a family about 10 years to get their child from the very first type of child restraint, rear-facing, up until the 2nd or even the 3rd year of life. The forward-facing car seat with a 5-point harness that covers the shoulders, the hips, and is attached at the crotch. The booster seat area that may cover a child all the way up between the ages of 8 to 10 to 12, and then finally the seat belt when they've fully outgrown the booster seat. Rear-facing seats for kids under 2, we already talked about how weak children are, and if you've ever held a newborn, you know that you have to hold the child's head. The child's neck is very weak and can't support the head. Therefore, a rear-facing car seat needs to be at a semi-reclined position so the child's airway stays open, the head stays back, and the child's head, shoulders, and hips go evenly into the car seat. Now, you'll remember that we talked about kids as old as 3 could still be able to use one of the rear-facing types of car seats. There are 2, one that's a carrier only that has a handle typically coming out of the car. You put it over your arm and can carry it around. But the bigger seats, the convertible seats, those that you see on the bottom of this picture, are bigger. They typically stay in the car. They're bigger, they're heavier. They are not seats that you'd want to carry into a restaurant. And those also protect the head, the neck, and the spine because the child is still reclined, in a semi-reclined position, keeping the airway open, and then allowing the head, shoulders, and hips to go evenly into the back of the seat. Once that is fully outgrown by height or weight, the label will say when that is, children between the ages of 2 and 6 or more ride forward-facing. And a car seat that has this harness, 5-point harness system, you'll see that, holds the biggest part of the child's body. And it's protected at the shoulders and the hips, exactly as we just talked about. You'd want to use this seat for as long as possible, holding the child in the best protection. This is even better than what you and I get using just a seatbelt. And then we have 2 different types of booster seats. And you'll notice the child in the center is using what we call a backless booster. It has no head restraint, but the vehicle head restraint serves that for her. And it has no guide for the shoulder belt that you will see on either of the outboard positions, either the purple or the gray seat has a little loop that the shoulder belt feeds through. And as the car seat is adjusted to fit the head of the child, the shoulder belt moves with the child restraint. So it's positioned right on the shoulder. These are perfectly positioned children. Keep this picture in your mind. This is what a child in a booster seat should look like in their child restraint. And then we move to adult seat belts for those kids that have outgrown. And you'll notice that the little girl in the front of this picture, her knees are bent at the edge of the seat so that her lap belt is down low on her hips. The shoulder belt is resting on her shoulder. And her brother, who's to her left, is sitting on his booster seat. He still needs the lift in order to get his shoulder belt positioned properly and his lap belt positioned properly. And his knees are bent at the edge of the booster seat. If you've ever tried to sit on the floor with your legs extended straight out, you realize you soon have to change position. And a child whose knees do not bend at the edge of the seat will have to move forward, so they do. When they move forward and they're not in a booster seat, that lap belt rides up onto the tummy, the soft tissue of their belly, and the shoulder belt can go along their face or neck. That's not appropriate. So these 4 steps, the car seat first, rear facing, then forward facing, then the car seat with a harness to the booster seat, the booster seat to a seat belt, and then the seat belt alone for all occupants after, say, age 10 or 11 or 12, when they've fully outgrown the booster. It's more about size than by age. And you'll see when we first began, when we defined child, this is all going to come into how your education will unfold as you have defined who the child is in your country, so that you can create the materials that people will understand and be able to measure their child so they're in the appropriate restraint. So once we have a child using restraints, we want to make sure that they use them properly. And that means they have to select the right seat for the age, weight, and height of the child and their developmental level. The direction, they have rear and forward facing, never side facing, and never in a position in a vehicle seat that's a backward facing vehicle seat. The location is in a back seat. The harness is fit so that it sits snugly, tightly on the child's shoulders and hips, and it's installed in the vehicle tightly so the child restraint does not move more than 1 inch side to side or front to back. And that is 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. So you'll get a sense of too loose means the car seat moves too much to get a nice tight fit. So you can't forget about teens, because many times you'll have a program that may take children up to age 12, but then at 13 kids are on their own, and you don't want that. You still need to provide education so that kids who've been restrained their whole lives continue to use a restraint through their teenage years. So I want to talk a little bit about data, and if you look at this picture, you'll see the legend off to the right shows us that we're looking at really 4 different groupings of children who are killed in motor vehicle crashes in 2017 in the United States. And if you look at this picture, you will realize that we have pretty consistently low and not acceptable, but still much, much lower rates for those children who are ages 4 and under, so typically birth, all the way up through age 14. But if you look at the blue line, this is going to tell you right away, I have a serious problem with this age group. And this may be where you begin some of your work. Maybe not. Maybe it's harder, and I think it is more difficult to reach the 15 to 19-year-old occupant and driver. But it still is worth 1,000 words when you just look at the chart and you can see that there's really very clear evidence that this is a group that will need your attention. The other groups also need your attention, but this group is highly visible when you're looking at data. Another thing that we do in the US is we put data out every year that looks at how we're doing. We're keeping score. We're tracking how well we're doing. And when we look at our 2013 data and compare it to our 2017 data, we can see that we've made progress in some areas and we've lost ground in others. And those are places where we're going to need to pick up the beat and keep going so that we don't get complacent in thinking that we've solved the problem. Because new babies are born every day. New teenagers are around every day. And our messaging has to be clear, consistent, and parents have to understand that this is their responsibility. Kids depend on them for the correct information. So here we have another one that shows a very clear graph that when drivers are buckled, kids are buckled. So we absolutely want to do education to parents and caregivers that they assure that every person in their vehicle when they're driving is restrained. That's the driver, that's other adults, it could be older children. But when drivers are unbuckled, you can see that children are also more likely to be unbuckled. So this is a very clear idea of using the data to drive that message home to drivers, why it's important for them to buckle up, because number one, they're examples for their children, and number two, they can become projectiles in a crash and actually hurt children who are unrestrained. So this is something that the education is important and the data helps to make your case. So I also talked earlier about working with partners. And in the United States, we have a certification program for child passenger safety technicians. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But we do that in partnership with our National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. And NHTSA is a publisher of a lot of the data, the research that's done. And they are our Ministry of Transport. Safe Kids, the organization I work for, is the certifying body for this certification program. And then we have a board that's comprised of all of those stakeholders we talked about at the beginning: law enforcement, first responders, child care providers, government workers, healthcare workers. All those people who have an interest in child passenger safety sit on a board and assure that the messaging we use is consistent and clear and based in fact. And so a model like this is very useful in a country that's just getting started. So these are the stakeholders that look at all of these different aspects of child passenger safety. We have the government in the center. They set the tone, and they are the ones that monitor all the laws and regulations. What awareness training is there? Not everybody needs to be a technician. Not everybody needs to have a full course on child passenger safety. But parents really do need to know, number one, everybody restrained in their car. Everybody who's transporting their child restrains their child using their car seat. That awareness is critical. We need to work with the media so they give good stories that are based in fact. And those are important also for developing messaging for the public as well as for the educators and responders. Law enforcement, if they're going to have a law, you have to have people to enforce the law, and they have to understand it and be able to know when they do a stop on the side of the road how to help a family who has none of their children restrained or kids who are restrained very, very unsafely. They collect the data, they evaluate the data, and all of that plays into developing this big stakeholder partner, strong partnership that creates a better way for kids to be safe in a country and makes it across the board for all kids. So having that strategy is important, that you have a law, you begin to work at the grassroots level, you begin to notice things and see things and collect data. And let me just encourage you to begin to keep track of how many presentations you do, how many people you see, what are the things that people tell you. I'm still amazed. 30 years I'm in, and I still go to presentations and I talk to people and they still tell me, well, I didn't use a car seat until my granddaughter made me wear it. My granddaughter says, Pop, put on your seatbelt. Grandmom, wear your seatbelt. And so kids are oftentimes our best educators. So the laws that keep our kids educated and informed, and the law that's enforced works for the benefit of kids, works for the benefit of their families, and also works for the people who are trusted with enforcing the law. There are policies sometimes in organizations and businesses that say if you're going to drive our fleet car, you have to be buckled. And that could be a place to start with companies that have a fleet of 5 cars, 10 cars, 100 cars. Do they have a policy? Does your university have a policy that everybody who's driving, or even high school, any child who's driving to high school, do they have a policy that everybody has to have a seatbelt on when they come onto school property? And then looking at those regulations, is the car seat you're using crash tested? Does it carry a valid certification that it has been rigorously tested to withstand crash forces. In this day and age where you can buy car seats online and at yard sales, you don't know that, and you want a seat that carries some kind of a certification on the seat itself that says it meets or exceeds federal standards. And sometimes that's in the EU, it can be in the US, it can be in Canada, it can be in Japan, it can be in China, but they have to have that label that says it meets a valid standard. And take the first step, stay the course. You're going to make mistakes, just like we've all made mistakes. But when you get started, if you have a plan, you'll begin to see some of the benefits. So how does Safe Kids build a program? We do it in a couple of steps. We begin by doing research. What's out there? Who's already working? I love Mr. Fred Rogers. He's a television man in the United States, and he has a song that he sings called "Who Are the People in Your Neighborhood?" And these are the helpers that you can go to. There are people already working in your country. You don't know them yet maybe, but they're already working on this same issue because they were in a crash. They lost somebody special to them. They lost a valued employee to a crash, and they are already interested. So in doing your research, you want to look and see who's doing research in my country, who are those people, how can I reach them, how can I start to work with them. We then develop from that research programs that people who are going out and educating the public can use consistent messaging, and we send it through our global network. So everybody's using that message. Everybody buckled, all kids in the back, adults as well as kids, those messages are the same. And we're going to need to do that to get to that WHO target goal of 100% if we're all going to be working towards this. Awareness, not everybody, as I said, needs in-depth training, but they do need to know that they have to use their restraints and use them correctly. And we can help with that, and you can help with that. And then advocacy. How do we make sure that our laws are correct and that they're easy to enforce, or at least able to be enforced? And then how do we make sure that that advocacy turns to action, that people actually do use the things that make them safer in their cars? So we have a short awareness course that is free. Safe Kids is very happy to share it with you. You can put it into any language that you want. Anybody who's interested in this, and I would say that because you're here with me today, you're interested, you could use the pictures from this, some of the videos from this, just to go out and start talking to parents about making sure that all the kids in their vehicle are restrained and the adults are restrained. It's simple language, and it could be the first foot in the door that you do with a neighborhood group or with a group of kids in an after-school program, but it will lead to more community partners, and it will help you identify who are the champions that you're going to meet, who will want more training, more intensive training, so they can be your lieutenants working right alongside you and helping to make this work in your community or your country. So we like to use social media at Safe Kids. These numbers are way outdated. It only takes about 2 weeks for these numbers to be rather useless. But just know that there are a lot of tools. There's media impressions in print material. You can have Facebook fans and Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. There are many, many, many ways for you to share your message. And once you begin to develop that singular message for your country, what's a child? What's the law? What's best practice? That's when you begin to share this and get your name out there so people know to call you if they have questions. So what do you see when you look at this picture? It's one of my favorites because, number one, to get 5 children all sleeping at the same time and it's daylight is pretty startling to me. But you'll notice that the seat belts are in use in the bigger kids that are sitting by windows. The car seat is in use in the child who's sitting behind the front passenger seat. A lap belt is used for the child who's in the center of the back seat, the 3rd row. And so you'll notice that all 5 children are restrained. Now, they're not all restrained correctly because they're out of position. You'll notice the little boy on the right in the back seat doesn't have the shoulder belt on his shoulder. The child who's to his left, all the way against the window, has the seatbelt sitting pretty much close to his neck, his soft tissue of his neck, not the bony shoulder. Child in the red shirt in the second row also has a seatbelt not working. But what's amazing is that all the children are in a back seat. They're all in some kind of a restraint. They will all do better in a crash than a child who's unrestrained or riding in the front seat. And so what you really want to do is consider a good, better, best model. It's good. All these children are in a back seat. It's better because all of them are using some kind of a restraint. And we're not at best yet, because best would be that they're all using the restraints correctly. But the parents are going to be the people we educate as well as the kids. And we'll be working with them to tweak this, to make it just better, slightly better, so that each of the children gets a much better performance if there is a crash. And here's that picture again. So instead of deriding that parent or making that parent feel bad because their children aren't all perfect, I would look at this parent and say, you are amazing that you have all 5 children restrained. Most of them are in a restraint of some type. And we thank you for doing that. Now, can I help you get it tightened up just a little bit so each of the kids is a little safer? And most parents will react to that. They love the positive feedback first, that you acknowledge that they did this correctly at the beginning. So when you go out to begin working with families, you need a team. You cannot do it alone. I've said that now twice. But you need to bring those people together who are already working on the issue or that you can bring along to learn about the issue. You want to begin to put that useful data together. Are you just going to begin by working maybe at an elementary school and watching how children are dropped off at school? Are they in the front seat? Are they in the back seat? Are they seated? Are they standing in the front seat with their bodies right up against an airbag? Are they wearing a backpack as they're sitting on the back seat so they're not getting the full benefit of the restraints in the car? Are there policies at the school or at the workplace that make it easier and better for people to learn about road safety? Are you equipped to lead the effort? And can you start now to begin building that good, better, best model right where you are now, right where you work, and in the families that you work with? And maybe it's just at your church or at your child's school or at your workplace. But are you ready to become the voice of good, better, best in your country? So I talked to you about certification. This is a 4-day class that we teach in the United States, and we've also taught it in Germany and UAE and Qatar and China and Canada and Mexico, Uruguay, Brazil, Japan, number of countries, Argentina. Well, these are countries that have been involved in learning and taking this course so that anybody can pull into a car seat inspection, and the inspectors, you'll see them with the yellow vests, are capable of determining, is it the right selected seat? Is it facing the correct direction? Is it in the back seat? Is the child installed using the harness properly? And is the car seat itself installed in the car correctly? And right now we have 43,000 people working as technicians, certified technicians in the US, 1,600 instructors, and they have to recertify every 2 years to assure that their skills are sharp. So if you wanted to build a team of these certified technicians, we have a mechanism to do that, but it has to be done over a 3-year period so that you are able to really build a national program, not just one class. Because while one class will engage a few people, it's not enough to build a program, a big enough program to address a country. And so Safe Kids alone checks between 80 and 100,000 car seats per year. And we've kept a database of 2.3 million car seats in our database. So this is something that you're capable of doing. And the data that comes from that has helped to shape how car seats are designed, how they're tested, and how they perform with actual children in them. So if you're going to be the spokesperson, you need to build your professional skills. We can help you with that. You need to educate yourself, study road crashes as a leading mechanism, and know how to speak knowledgeably about it. Take the short course, it's free. Share the short course so that you can find champions. Anybody can teach this. It's done in a way that all you have to do is have interest to bring people to the table and begin the actual study. You could become a certified technician and an instructor. You can mentor people all the time with this. You can add partners along the way. And believe me, this is a field that changes every single day. There's a new product, a new regulation. Something's happening every day in road safety. It's never dull. And if you like this field, this is a great field for staying interested in your job. So increase your technical skills. And if you do decide to become that certified technician and want to be an instructor at some point to train key people, we say it's about 3 years. If you start the program with no technicians, you have your first course of 15, and you'd have to import the instructors for that. Those 15 should be made up of those key stakeholders. Shouldn't be all one group, it should be key stakeholders. You would run a second class in the second year, and people from the first class could help in that second class. And you would begin that by the end of that second year to have 30 people from that stakeholder group. And the third year, you would bring those people that helped in the second year who were in the first class to become instructors. And then you're ready to be independent, having your own national team. And you'd have to include those stakeholders to include law enforcement, healthcare, the first responders, and then all of the other folks that are interested as educators and advocates. So I thank you for your time today. I'm going to leave this up for a little bit of time, and I know this is going to be posted, so you'll be able to refer back to it. I love your questions. I'm in a WhatsApp group from the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi, and that WhatsApp group, they're every day they're on there sending messages about what they're doing. They're excited about what they're doing. You could do the same thing in your country. Just keep adding people to your WhatsApp, but include me too, so I can see what you're doing. If you want a copy of the short course, the basic awareness, you can do that through Carrie Chausberg, who's our Director of Certification at Safe Kids, and her email is here. All you need to do is send her an email, and she will send you the short course. So I thank you, and get busy. And I'm looking forward to seeing some changes around the world, and even if we drop those numbers a little bit each year, that's progress. So thank you.
Thank you, Lorrie, for sharing your valuable experience with us. This webinar is available on our website and YouTube channel, and you can go back and listen to it as many times as you like. Should you wish to learn more, you can ask questions via the feedback form on our website. We hope you have found this webinar useful. Thank you for listening, and have a safe day.